Hi, I'm Robin.
And I'm Chris. Together we're the Gen X couple.
Hey guys, take two, all Chris's fault.
Hello, everyone.
So this is going to conclude our month of mysteries, and we hope you've enjoyed them. I saved my favorite mystery for the end. We're talking about Dyatlov Pass, which was an incident where 9 hikers were found dead in the former USSR in the mountains in the winter. And we would like to apologize in advance for anything that gets mispronounced. I do have a list of all the hikers, and I'm probably going to butcher their names, but I promise I'm going to try my hardest not to mispronounce their names. And there's probably going to be some mispronunciations, so sorry in advance. But today's episode, like I said, we're talking about Dyatlov Pass. And it's a story of courage and tragedy, preparation and panic, and unanswered questions that have echoed for more than 6 decades. It defies an easy explanation. And like I said, it is a mysterious event. It unfolded in the winter of 1959 on the slopes of a peak that the local Mansi people called Kholat Syakhl, which translates to the Mountain of the Dead. And today we're going to explore this tragedy in every possible direction. We're going to talk about who the hikers were, what they were attempting, what they discovered, and what makes the evidence so unusual, and why even the most plausible explanations fail to account for every single detail. This is one of those historical mysteries where every answer leads to new questions.
So before we start, a quick triggering note.
Trigger.
We will be talking about exposure, hypothermia, severe injuries, and trauma in this episode. Nothing gratuitous, but clear descriptions are necessary to understand why this case is so baffling. If you listen with sensitivity to descriptions of death or injury, please take care as you listen. Now let's step back into the winter of 1959, into a story that still haunts the Ural Mountains.
Yeah, we're going to try to keep it as light as possible, but there are a few descriptions that are mildly gory, but I think you guys will be okay. It's not too bad. We tried to gloss over that part as much as possible. So let's start with the people themselves. These hikers that went up onto this mountain in 1959 were not just random travelers or unprepared tourists. This group consisted of 9 very experienced hikers. They were all students or recent graduates of the Ural Polytechnical Institute in Sverdlovsk, Soviet Union. Again, I want to emphasize that these were skilled, capable hikers. They were motivated by a desire to test their abilities in winter mountain trekking, which was a sport that was respected and encouraged in the USSR at the time. So I'm going to read you their names and ages, and I'm going to try very hard to pronounce these properly. So, like I said, there are 9 of them. There's Igor Dyatlov, who was 23, Zenaida Kolmogorova, who was 22, Rustam Slobodin, who was 23, Ludmila Dubinina, who was age 20, Alexander Kolevatov, who was 24, Nikolai Thibodeau Brignoles, who was age 23, Simeon Zolotaryov, who was age 38, Yuri Doroshenko, who was age 21, and Yuri Krivonishenko, who was age 23. And originally there was a 10th member, Yuri Yudin, who was supposed to go with the group, but he turned back early on January 28th, 1959, due to illness. Yudin's decision to turn back is often mentioned as a tragic irony because it meant he survived while the others did not. Again, I need to emphasize that these hikers were not rookies. They were very competent hikers. They were highly trained in winter conditions. They went equipped with radios, cameras, stoves, ice axes, and multiple layers of clothing. The goal was ambitious, but not impossible. It was a winter traverse toward Orton, which was another peak in the northern Urinals. No, I said Urinals, but I meant Urals. Oh my God. Sorry.
So,
Anyway.
on January 23rd, 1959, the group left Zabralski by train. They arrived at Ivadel, the last significant settlement, and then took a truck to Visay, a remote logging town often used as a starting point for wilderness expeditions. From Visay, these hikers set out on skis on January 27th. They were expected to complete their route and return to civilization by February 12th. When they failed to check in or reach their next waypoint by that date, friends and family alerted authorities, and a search was organized. It is critical to understand that the Soviet Union at the time kept tight control over information. The details we have come from declassified investigative files, interviews conducted after the fall of USSR, and research by historians who gain access to documents once sealed behind state censorship.
Should we have talked about the USSR and all that stuff?
Well,
Although
no.
you guys,
Everyone knows.
even the kids, you should have learned this in school. So if you
Yes.
haven't, go do some research because it's a big part of history. But anyway, so the final campsite of these hikers was established on February 1st, 1959, and it was high on the eastern slope of Kholat Syakhl, the mountain. The location was exposed, windy, and well above the tree line. Modern weather reconstruction suggests temperatures that at night may have been as low as minus 28 degrees Celsius or even lower with the wind chill. So, why did they choose such an exposed location? The evidence suggests that the group intended to set the camp up further down in the forest where shelter and wood were available. Photographs recovered from the camera show the slope that they were cutting into had a steep incline rather than a level meadow. So, one plausible explanation was that they arrived late in the day and fearing the darkness, they just set up wherever they could. We're never going to know. Their tent was erected by cutting a platform into the slope. The canopy faced downhill, trapping snow and making the interior dark and uncomfortable, but at least providing shelter from wind. What happened next is where the known timeline becomes chillingly unclear.
There is one photograph from the last afternoon that shows the hikers working on the snow wall in the platform. The timestamp suggests they were active and aware as daylight faded. There are no photos showing any threat or unusual events later that evening. Then the photos stop. The next evidence we have comes from the scene itself 3 weeks later. Investigators found the tent cut open from the inside, not zipped or unlatched, but cut with a blade or a tool. Inside were boots, warm clothing, cameras, food, and even a stove. None of the hikers took what they would have needed to survive in that cold winter night. Investigators recorded footprints in the snow leading away from the tent. There were 9 sets of tracks. Remarkably, some of these tracks were made by hikers in socks or even barefoot. Some were only underwear and nothing else. These tracks led down the slope toward a dense cedar forest about 1.5 kilometers away before disappearing under the fresh snow cover. The first question most people ask is painfully simple. Why would 9 experienced hikers flee into sub-negative 30-degree temperatures without boots? Why abandon shelter and heat? The answer to this question is central to the mystery and remains contentious.
So the first 2 bodies were discovered on February 26th, 1959, under a large cedar tree near what appeared to be a small fire. The hikers were Yuri Doroshenko and Yuri Krivonishenko. Both men were partially clothed, wearing only socks and underwear, desperately trying to keep warm. The small fire nearby suggests that they sought warmth once they reached the tree line, but it was not nearly enough to save them. Not far from the tree, rescuers found 3 more bodies. They found Igor Dyatlov, Zeneda Kolmogorova, and Rustim Slobodin. And these guys were found between the cedar tree and the tent. The positioning suggests that they may have tried to return to the tent or seek shelter, but none of them made it. Their deaths were eventually attributed to hypothermia, although Rustam's skill had a crack that seemed significant, but it wasn't a fatal injury. Hypothermia has well-documented symptoms. It can cause confusion, irrational behavior, and paradoxical undressing. In severe cases, victims may undress because their blood feels hot, even as their core temperature keeps dropping. This can help explain how some of the hikers ended up in socks and underwear, yet this alone does not explain other parts of the evidence.
So, as the snow melts in early May of 1959, searchers uncovered the bodies of the remaining 4 hikers in a ravine about 75 meters deep into the forest. They were Ludmila
Dubinina, Simeon Zolotaryov, Nikolai Thibodeau-Brignoles, and Alexander Kolavatov.
And what made this discovery particularly shocking were the injuries. These 4 did not have simple hypothermia. Their bodies displayed severe internal trauma.
I can just read this because it's got the names. I can just do this whole thing. So, Thibodeau-Brignoles had skull fractures consistent with a high-impact force equivalent to that of a car crash. Dubinina and Zolotaryov had multiple broken ribs and severe chest compression injuries, also consistent with massive force. Here's a weird one. Dubinina's tongue and eyes were missing during the autopsy, and some of their clothing showed low levels of radiation contamination. Do you want to read this? Because I did the names.
That's fine. Yet there was no corresponding external wounds.
Sorry for the weird pause.
Cuts, scrapes, or bruising that typically go along with such internal injuries. This paradox only deepened the mystery.
Yeah, I thought he was going to take over that last paragraph. I just read the part with the names to make it easier on him, but yeah, sorry about that awkward pause. So now we're going to talk about the official investigation. So, of course, the Soviet authorities did conduct an investigation. The first 5 bodies were examined quickly and their deaths were attributed to hypothermia. When the remaining 4 bodies were found and autopsied, the report noted severe injuries without adequate external trauma. So the official cause of death was listed as, and I quote, a compelling natural force. And that's a phrase that acknowledges that it was an unknown cause of death without assigning blame. The investigation was officially closed back in May of 1959, and the files were restricted. For decades, details were inaccessible to the public, which only, of course, fueled speculation, rumor, and myth. Only after the dissolution of the Soviet Union were the files open to researchers and journalists.
And over the years, scholars and scientists have proposed multiple theories that could explain nearly every element of this case, yet no single explanation has accounted for every detail. One of the most scientific supported explanations involves a slab avalanche, or a snow slab event. Research from Swiss and Russian scientists, including computer modeling
You had it right the first time.
has shown that a significant slab of snow could have released, impacting the tent and pressuring the hikers. This could cause panic, prompting them to flee into the cold, and potentially cause crushing injuries consistent with the internal trauma. Another explanation involves katabatic winds.
Katabatic?
Winds. Cold, dense air rushing down the slope at high speeds. These winds can be unpredictable, fierce, and terrifying when encountered at night. A sudden blast of wind and cold might force even experienced hikers to flee for perceived safety. Hypothermia itself can explain paradoxical undressing and irrational behavior. Once the core body temperature drops, victims may remove clothing or wander without understanding how cold they are. The radiation found on some clothing has been explained by the contamination prior to the hike, possibly from spent industrial equipment or clothing stored near radioactive materials. Something that was not uncommon in Soviet-era factories and storage sites.
Yeah, it's weird because none of those fit all of the hikers, so it's kind of weird. And why was that girl's tongue and eyes missing? We're never going to know. But despite decades of study, there do remain aspects that are hard to reconcile. Why did the group cut open the tent from the inside rather than use the zipper? Why did some of the hikers flee with insufficient clothing while others stayed and died of hypothermia? Why were 4 hikers so deep into the ravine? And then how did massive internal injuries occur without the expected external trauma to go with it? There were no signs of struggle. There were no footprints indicating wild animals. There were no weapons marks, and there was no confirmed hostile human activity in the area. Indigenous Mansi people were peaceful and not known to be in the area that night or that time. Military tests have been suggested, including secret weapons, but there is no conclusive evidence to back that one up.
So the Dyatlov Pass incident
Dyatlov Pass.
has become one of the most studied and debated mysteries in modern history.
Debated.
It has inspired documentaries, academic papers, fictional retellings, and theories ranging from the plausible natural explanations to fringe supernatural speculation. What makes this case enduring is that it touches on human courage and human vulnerability. It blends well-documented facts with unanswered questions, even with modern science and decades of research. Dead Mountain still holds elements that resist explanation.
So, what truly happened on that frozen slope on February 1st, 1959? The most likely explanations involve a combination of natural forces, environmental dangers, and human reactions under extreme stress. But the contradictions and oddities in the evidence mean that this incident will remain in the realm of mystery even as the research continues.
And perhaps that is why the Dyatlov Pass remains so compelling. It's not just about death in the wilderness, it's about how people confront the unknown and how even the best prepared among us can be overwhelmed by forces beyond comprehension. The footprints in the snow, the torn tent, the hikers in the forest, the ravine, the unexplained injuries, they all form a story we keep returning to, searching for answers that have not yet been found. So thank you for joining us in this deep dive into the most haunted, unsolved mysteries of the 20th century.
Yeah, this is going to do it for today. We hope you guys liked this episode. If you have any ideas that you want us to cover, let us know. I'm super into these kind of mysteries, but we have some fun stuff coming up for February that are not mysterious, but it's going to be fun. So make sure you come back. You know where to find us.
And with that, see you later, alligator.
And a wild crocodile.